Fort Griffin, Texas, buried more gamblers per year than any town in the American West. One player survived 15 years in those rooms without ever carrying a weapon. She weighed barely 100 pounds, dressed like a debutante, and took more money from armed men than most outlaws stole in a lifetime. Then she disappeared so completely that the town that buried her never knew her real name. Here is what actually happened. The Wild West had rules. Unwritten, sure, but everyone understood them. You carried a gun. You watched your back. And if you sat at a poker table, you accepted the possibility that you might not stand up again. Accusations of cheating ended in gunfire. Bad debts ended in unmarked graves. The card table was, functionally, a slow duel. And into this world walked Carlotta J. Tompkins. Born in 1844 in Warsaw, Kentucky, Carlotta grew up in a world that could not have been further from the Texas frontier. Her family owned a plantation. They had money, standing, and the kind of Southern respectability that got your name printed in church bulletins. Her father was a gentleman gambler, not the desperate or broke type. He played cards after dinner with men of equal standing, and he considered it an intellectual exercise. He taught his daughter to play, not as a novelty, as a discipline. Probability, observation, composure. The mathematics of risk. In a world that trained young women to embroider and curtsy, Carlotta Tompkins was learning to read faces and calculate odds before she hit 15. Then the Civil War arrived, and it took everything. The plantation economy collapsed. The family fortune evaporated. Her father died. Suddenly, the refined young woman from Kentucky's landed gentry had nothing. No inheritance, no marriage prospects worth mentioning, no profession that polite society would accept. But she had one skill, and here is where it gets interesting. Most women in Carlotta's position faced a handful of options, none of them good. Domestic service, marriage to whoever would have them, or slow poverty in a country that offered no safety net for displaced Southern families. Carlotta looked at those options and chose none of them. She chose the card table. To understand how radical this was, you need to understand the 1860s. Women did not gamble professionally. The spaces where serious money changed hands were saloons, riverboats, and back rooms filled exclusively with armed drinking men. A woman entering that world wasn't just shattering social norms. She was walking into genuine physical danger every single night. Carlotta did not flinch, or if she did, it never once showed. She packed whatever she could carry, left Kentucky behind, and pointed herself toward the Mississippi River, where the money flowed, where the gamblers gathered, where a woman with surgeon's nerves and a face that betrayed nothing could either build a fortune or vanish without a trace. She had no intention of vanishing. The Mississippi River in the 1860s was not a body of water. It was an economy, and the steamboats crawling up and down its length were not passenger vessels. They were floating casinos disguised as transportation. Carlotta Tompkins stepped onto one of these boats with nothing but a modest trunk and a skill set her dead father never imagined she would need to survive. She was barely 20. The men at the card tables averaged twice her age and carried weapons as casually as pocket watches. If they had known what she was about to do to their bankrolls, they probably would have thrown her overboard before the boat left port. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Riverboat gambling had its own brutal ecosystem. At the top sat the professional sharps. These were men who made their entire living at the table, many using marked cards, rigged decks, and sleight of hand so polished it qualified as performance art. Below them came the wealthy amateurs, plantation owners, cotton traders, merchants flush with cash, and just drunk enough to believe their luck was about to turn. At the bottom were the desperate, men gambling their last dollar because the alternative was admitting they had nothing left. Carlotta fit none of these categories, and that confused everyone. She was young, well-spoken, and dressed like a woman of means. In the social architecture of a riverboat, women occupied exactly two roles: passenger or entertainer. A woman sitting down to play serious poker was so far outside the expected script that most men simply did not know how to respond. Some laughed. Some refused to play against her. Others sat down assuming they were about to take easy money from a naive girl playing at a man's game. Those men learned expensive lessons. What Carlotta understood, and what her opponents consistently failed to grasp, was that their confusion was her greatest advantage. Every second a man spent underestimating her was a second he was not paying attention to her actual play. She read their tells while they were still processing the novelty of her presence. By the time they adjusted, the pot was already hers. She played conservatively at first, small stakes, learning the rhythms of each boat, each table, each type of opponent. She studied the cheaters and memorized their methods without ever confronting them directly. Confrontation meant violence, and violence meant attention she could not afford. Because here is the detail that made everything work. Nobody at those tables knew her real name, but she had left Carlotta Tompkins back in Kentucky. On the river, she was whoever she needed to be. A widow traveling south, a merchant's daughter heading to New Orleans. The identities shifted, but the poker face never did. And every dollar she won, she sent home. Her mother and sister in Kentucky survived on money earned at tables they would have been horrified to know existed. The river was her classroom. Texas would be her stage. San Antonio in the late 1860s was the kind of city that could make you rich by Tuesday and bury you by Thursday. And it was exactly where Carlotta Tompkins decided to stop moving. The riverboats had been profitable, but they had a fundamental problem. You were trapped. On a boat, every game happened inside a sealed container with the same group of men for days. Win too much, and word traveled fast. Lose your anonymity, and you lost your edge. Carlotta needed a bigger pond. She found one in Texas. San Antonio, after the Civil War, was booming with cattle money, military wages, and the kind of reckless cash flow that made gambling halls more profitable than banks. At the center of this world sat the University Club. Despite the respectable name, it was one of the city's premier gambling establishments. High stakes, well-connected clientele, and a constant need for skilled dealers who could keep games running while the house collected its percentage. Carlotta walked in and got herself hired. Not as a waitress, not as entertainment, as a house dealer. To put this in perspective, a house dealer in that era was a position of real authority. You controlled the pace of the game. You managed the money. Yet you needed mathematical precision under pressure and the ability to handle volatile men who had just lost a month's wages in a single hand. The University Club did, and the reason was purely economic. Carlotta was spectacular at the job. She dealt Faro, one of the most popular card games of the era. Faro was fast, mathematical, and notoriously easy to rig if the dealer knew what they were doing. Carlotta ran clean games, which made the house look honest, which brought in wealthier players, which made the house more money. Simple arithmetic. But here is what made her legendary. She did not just deal for the house. She played her own games on the side. And she won. consistently, with a composure so unshakable that men started calling her the Angel of San Antonio. But now that nickname deserves some unpacking. When they did not call her an angel because she was kind to the losers. They called her that because of how she looked while she was taking their money. The silk dresses, the careful composure, the almost serene calm, while the men around her sweated, cursed, and occasionally reached for their holsters. She looked like she belonged at a high society ball, not a gambling hall where fortunes changed hands under lamplight. And that was the strategy. A performance so convincing that it became its own form of misdirection. San Antonio made Carlotta wealthy, but it also made her visible. And visibility in her profession was the one thing that could get you killed. The frontier was calling, and it had teeth. Fort Griffin, Texas, did not have a sheriff for most of its existence. It did not need one, because the town operated on a simpler system. You handled your own problems, or your problems handled you. Carlotta did not arrive at Fort Griffin directly. She moved west through Fort Concho first, another military outpost town, where soldiers, buffalo hunters, and outlaws collided nightly over cards and whiskey. Fort Concho was rough. Fort Griffin was something else entirely. Imagine a town built at the edge of civilization. No permanent law enforcement, no functioning courts, a population that fluctuated between soldiers, cattle drovers, fugitives, and professional gamblers who had already been run out of more respectable places. The saloons stayed open around the clock because closing them would have required someone with the authority to do so, and nobody had that authority. This was the kind of place where Doc Holliday drank, where Wyatt Earp passed through, and where Big Nose Kate dealt cards in establishments that made San Antonio's University Club look like a church social. And this is where Carlotta sat down at a poker table and did not stand up until morning. The details of that night are debated by historians. What is not debated is the outcome. She played through an all-night session against some of the most experienced gamblers on the Texas frontier and walked away with a sum large enough to earn a new name. The men at the table, most of whom spoke at least some border Spanish, started calling her Lottie Deno, a lot of money. The frontier shortened it to Lottie Deno, and just like that, Carlotta Tompkins disappeared for good. Lottie Deno was born. Now, and you might be wondering why a woman who had spent years hiding her identity would suddenly accept a nickname that advertised exactly how much money she was winning. Fair question. The answer reveals something important about how the frontier actually worked. In San Antonio, anonymity had been protection. In Fort Griffin, reputation was protection. This was a town where unknown faces attracted suspicion and established names commanded a certain grudging respect. Being Lottie Deno meant something at every table she sat down at. It meant you were going to lose, and you were going to lose to someone who had already beaten everyone else in the room. They started calling her the Queen of the Pasteboards, pasteboards being the slang term for playing cards. It was not a compliment exactly, more like a warning label. But here is the tension that made Fort Griffin different from everywhere she had played before. In San Antonio, losing a poker game meant losing money. In Fort Griffin, losing a poker game to a woman sometimes meant losing face. And in a town without law, wounded pride was the most dangerous thing in the room. Lottie kept winning, and the men she was beating kept getting angrier. Something had to give. Most gamblers at Fort Griffin carried at least one weapon. Lottie Deno carried none. And somehow she was the one still standing when others were not. That fact alone should tell you everything about how she operated. Consider this. Fort Griffin averaged roughly one violent death a week during its peak years. Card games accounted for a significant percentage. Accusations of cheating, disputes over pots, grudges that simmered for hours before erupting. The poker table was not metaphorically dangerous. It was literally one of the most hazardous places you could sit in the American West. Lottie sat there every single night, unarmed. So how did she survive? Historians who have studied her career point to 3 specific strategies, and each one reveals a mind operating several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. First, she never embarrassed anyone publicly. This sounds minor. It was not. When a man lost badly at Fort Griffin, the most dangerous moment was not when he ran out of money. It was when the other men at the table saw him run out of money. Humiliation in front of peers was the spark that lit most saloon violence. Lottie had a reputation for winning graciously. No gloating, no commentary. But she took the pot with the same expression she wore when she lost one. It gave defeated men room to walk away without feeling like the entire saloon had witnessed their failure. Second, she chose her opponents carefully. Lottie avoided men who were visibly intoxicated beyond reason, men with known violent histories, and men who had already lost more than they could afford. She was not just reading cards. She was reading the room's emotional temperature before she ever sat down. Third, and perhaps most importantly, she cultivated relationships with the people who ran the establishments. Saloon owners and bartenders were the closest thing Fort Griffin had to authority figures. They wanted profitable, clean games that attracted wealthy players. Lottie provided exactly that. In return, she had allies in every room she worked. Not bodyguards. Exactly. But people with a financial interest in making sure the woman who filled their tables stayed healthy. Get this, there is no verified historical account of Lottie Deno ever being physically attacked during her gambling career. In a town where seasoned gunfighters met violent ends, a woman with no weapon and a growing fortune walked untouched for years. Some frontier accounts attributed this to luck. Others whispered about something almost supernatural in the way trouble simply never reached her. The more grounded explanation is simpler and more impressive. She was just that good at managing people, better at reading men than she was at reading cards. And she was exceptional at reading cards. But managing angry losers was one problem. What Lottie needed next was a partner she could actually trust, and she was about to find one in the last place anyone expected. Frank Thurmond walked into Fort Griffin with a reputation that arrived before he did. Gambler, businessman, a man comfortable operating in legal gray areas, and the only person on the Texas frontier who would become Lottie Deno's equal. Now, partnerships between professional gamblers in the 1870s were about as stable as nitroglycerin on a dirt road. The math was brutal. 2 people splitting winnings meant less money for each. Worse, a partner who knew your methods also knew your weaknesses. And in a profession where information was currency, that knowledge could be sold, traded, or used against you the moment loyalty became inconvenient. Most gambling partnerships ended in betrayal. Many ended in violence. But Lottie had avoided entanglements for years, precisely because she understood this calculus better than anyone. She worked alone because alone was safer. So what changed? The historical record is frustratingly thin on specifics. What we know is that Frank Thurmond was not a typical frontier gambler. He had business instincts that extended well beyond the card table. He dealt in real estate, mining interests, and various enterprises that straddled the line between legitimate and questionable. He was, by frontier standards, a strategist. Not just someone who played hands, but someone who thought in terms of long-term positioning. Lottie recognized something in that, perhaps because it mirrored her own approach. They began working the frontier towns together, not always at the same table. Though sometimes Frank would play in one establishment while Lottie worked another. They shared intelligence about opponents, tracked which towns had the most money flowing through them, and coordinated their movements with a discipline that most professional operations would envy. But here is what made the partnership genuinely unusual. It was built on mutual respect for each other's skill. Frank did not try to protect Lottie. He did not play the role of guardian or enforcer. By every historical account, he treated her as a professional peer. In the 1870s, on the Texas frontier, where women were routinely treated as property or decoration, together, they cleaned out high-profile players across multiple towns. When their combined earnings grew substantial enough that they began thinking about something almost unheard of in their profession: an exit strategy. The timeline of their romantic relationship remains deliberately murky. Lottie guarded her personal life with the same ferocity she brought to the card table. What historians can confirm is that at some point during their years working together, the partnership became a marriage. The exact date is disputed because, unsurprisingly, Lottie kept it private. You might be wondering why. After all, marriage was respectable. Marriage was exactly the kind of thing that could legitimize a woman in frontier society. But that is exactly the point. A married woman gambler lost the mystique of the untouchable solo operator. She became someone's wife first and a card player second. Lottie was not ready to be someone's wife first. Not yet. She still had tables to burn. By the late 1870s, Lottie Deno had a problem that no amount of poker skill could solve. People were telling stories about her, and some of those stories were getting dangerously close to fiction. This is important to understand. On the frontier, a reputation was like a loaded weapon, useful when it kept people at a respectful distance, lethal when it attracted the wrong kind of attention. And the stories circulating about Lottie were attracting exactly the wrong kind. One tale claimed she had beaten Doc Holliday himself for $3,000 in a single sitting. Another described her pulling a six-shooter during a dispute. A third painted her as a seductress who lured wealthy men to the table and stripped them of their fortunes through charm as much as card play. Here is the thing. Historians have examined these stories extensively. The Doc Holliday poker match is almost certainly romanticized legend. Holliday did frequent Fort Griffin during the same period, so their paths likely crossed. But the details of a dramatic $3,000 showdown? That reads more like frontier mythology than documented fact. The six-shooter incident contradicts everything we know about how she operated. She survived specifically by avoiding confrontation. And the seductress narrative says far more about how the frontier processed the idea of a successful woman than it does about Lottie's actual methods. But the truth did not matter. The stories did. What every exaggerated tale raised the stakes for anyone who sat across from her. Young gamblers looking to build reputations started seeking her out. Not to learn from her, to beat her. Because defeating the legendary Lottie Deno would make a name faster than a year of grinding out wins against ordinary opponents. She had become a target, not because she had done anything wrong, but because her mythology had grown beyond her control. And there was another problem. The more famous Lottie Deno became, the harder it was to keep Carlotta Tompkins buried. Remember, her entire system depended on separation between her gambling identity and her real family back in Kentucky. Her mother and sister still had no idea how the money arriving from Texas was actually being earned. As if the newspaper decided to investigate the real woman behind the queen of the pasteboards, that wall collapses. Believe it or not, frontier newspapers were already taking interest. The Wild West had its own celebrity culture, crude but voracious. Colorful characters made good copy, and a beautiful woman beating men at poker in the roughest towns in Texas was irresistible material. Lottie could see the trajectory. More fame meant more challengers. More newspaper attention meant exposure. More exposure meant her family discovering the truth. Or worse, someone from her past recognizing her and connecting the dots publicly. She had spent over a decade building a fortune at the card table. Now the table itself was turning against her. For the first time, the smartest move was to fold. In the early 1880s, Lottie Deno did something that almost no professional gambler in the American West ever managed. She quit, on her own terms, with her health, her money, and her secrets intact. To appreciate how extraordinary this was, consider the standard career trajectories of her peers. Doc Holliday died broke and sick at 36. Wild Bill Hickok took a bullet to the back of the head during a poker game. Countless lesser-known professionals drank themselves into poverty or ended up in shallow graves outside the towns that had made them famous. The frontier gambling life did not come with a retirement plan. It came with an expiration date. Lottie refused to accept hers. She and Frank Thurmond left the frontier gambling circuit and relocated to Deming, New Mexico, a small, quiet town that was growing alongside the Southern Pacific Railroad. Not the kind of place where anyone would look for the queen of the pasteboards, which was precisely the point. Now, here is where the reinvention becomes almost unbelievable. Lottie did not simply stop gambling. She became a completely different person. She and Frank invested their winnings into land, property, and legitimate business ventures. They became landowners, respectable ones, the kind of people who got invited to civic meetings and whose opinions carried weight in local affairs. Lottie went further. She helped found the local Episcopal church. She taught Sunday school. She organized charitable events. She became, by every observable measure, a model citizen of Deming, New Mexico. Let that settle for a moment. A woman who had spent over 15 years in the most dangerous card rooms on the frontier, who had cleaned out cowboys and professional sharps alike, who had earned nicknames that implied both wealth and menace, was now teaching scripture to children on Sunday mornings, and nobody questioned it. How? Because Deming did not know. The town received Lottie and Frank as prosperous newcomers with money to invest and manners that suggested good breeding. Nobody connected the elegant Mrs. Thurmond with the legendary Lottie Deno from Texas. The two identities existed in completely separate worlds, and Lottie had spent her entire adult life making sure those worlds never touched. Some historians find this almost too clean. A few have speculated that certain residents might have suspected something about the Thurmonds' past, but chose not to investigate. After all, to be a wealthy couple investing in your town's growth and donating to your church is not the kind of gift you examine too closely. Whether silence was ignorance or polite agreement to look the other way remains an open question. What is not in question is the completeness of the transformation. Carlotta Tompkins had become Lottie Deno. Lottie Deno had become Mrs. Frank Thurmond. Each identity shed like a skin when it outlived its usefulness. Most people spend their whole lives trapped inside one story. Lottie wrote 3, and nobody caught her editing the drafts. Mrs. Frank Thurmond attended church every Sunday for 5 decades. Not one person in that congregation knew they were sitting next to the most successful female poker player in American frontier history. Think about what that requires. Not for a week, not for a year, for 50 years. Half a century of small-town life in Deming, New Mexico, where everyone knew their neighbors, where gossip traveled faster than the mail, and where a single slip of the tongue could unravel everything. Lottie navigated all of it without once breaking character. And make no mistake, it was a character. The real woman underneath had spent her formative years on riverboats and in saloons, calculating odds and reading desperation in men's eyes across a felt table. That person did not evaporate because she started attending church socials. She was in there, behind the pleasant smiles and the charitable donations and the Sunday school lessons, playing the longest con of her career. Or was it a con? This is the question historians genuinely debate. Some argue Lottie's respectable years were pure performance, but she had spent decades pretending to be things she was not. Why would Deming be any different? The church, the charity, the civic involvement, all just another bluff at a different kind of table. Others take a more generous view. People change. A woman who gambled to survive at 20 might genuinely find faith at 40. You do not teach Sunday school for 50 years as a cover story. That is commitment on a level that transcends strategy. The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere between the two. Lottie was almost certainly both. A woman who had learned to perform respectability so well that it eventually became indistinguishable from the real thing. Meanwhile, the frontier she had left behind was dying. The towns that had made her famous were shrinking or vanishing. Fort Griffin became a ghost town. That the saloon culture that had defined the Wild West gave way to railroads, telegraph lines, and actual law enforcement. The world Lottie had conquered simply ceased to exist, and the people who had known her as Lottie Deno aged out alongside it. Old gamblers died or scattered. Witnesses to her legendary card games faded from memory. With each passing year, the distance between Mrs. Thurmond and the queen of the pasteboards grew wider. Frank died in 1908. Lottie continued alone in Deming for another 26 years. Quiet, respected, unremarkable to anyone who did not know where to look. She never told anyone. Not her neighbors, not her fellow church members, not the friends she had made over half a century of small-town life. The cards stayed face down until the very end. And even then, it took historians decades to turn them over. Lottie Deno died on February 9, 1934. 21 years later, a red-haired woman named Miss Kitty Russell appeared on a television show called Gunsmoke, and millions of Americans fell in love with a character they had no idea was based on a real person. Miss Kitty ran the Long Branch Saloon in fictional Dodge City. She was poised, sharp, independent, and operated in a man's world without losing her composure. Sound familiar? Television historians and Western scholars have long credited Lottie Deno as the primary real-life inspiration. The parallels are difficult to dismiss. A self-possessed woman thriving in frontier saloon culture, navigating danger with intelligence rather than force, earning respect in spaces never designed for her. Gunsmoke ran for 20 seasons, when it remains one of the longest-running primetime shows in American television history. Miss Kitty became an icon, and the woman who inspired her had been dead for 2 decades, buried under a name most of Deming. New Mexico still did not associate with poker. The irony is almost too perfect. Lottie spent her entire life making sure nobody knew who she really was. Then, Hollywood took her story, changed the name, and broadcast it into every living room in America. She became more famous as a fictional character than she had ever been as herself. But here is what makes her story matter beyond the entertainment value. We started with a question: genius or con artist? After 10 chapters, the honest answer is neither label captures it. Lottie Deno was something rarer, yet she was a woman who understood the rules of every room she entered and then played by her own. She was born into privilege and lost it to war. She taught herself a profession that could have killed her every night for 15 years. She outplayed men who had been gambling since before she was born. She built a fortune without a weapon, a bodyguard, or a single advantage the world was willing to give her. Then she walked away, reinvented herself completely, and lived quietly until 89. No one saw her coming. No one saw her leave. The most dangerous player at the table was never the one with the fastest gun or the biggest stack of chips. It was the one who controlled the game so completely that her opponents did not realize they were losing until it was already over. Carlotta Tompkins knew that. Lottie Deno proved it, and Mrs. E. Frank Thurmond took the secret to her grave. Now, if this story kept you watching longer than you expected, that means Lottie just played you too. She has been doing it for over 150 years, and she still has not lost. The least you can do is hit the like button on this video. And if you want more stories about the people history tried to forget, please subscribe to the channel, because the next one is just as unbelievable, and it is already dealt.